The Agenda this week talked to Canada's most successful Jeopardy champ, Matea Roach, learned about cancer rates among young adults, and caught up on the Emergencies Act inquiry. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with Anand Gurdadas on why persuasion matters for democracy.
From cable channels to political leaders to newspaper to everything.
Social media.
Social media, of course. They want people in their respective corners, and they don't want people to be able to persuade each other. Who wins if that status quo persists?
I mean, I wrote the book because I want, in a way, to illustrate exactly what you said, that there are very powerful people who want you to live in a kind of unthinking, reflexive tribe and not to do what democracies depend on, which is think for yourself and try to talk to people about the world you want. And I think it's important to defy those people who don't want you to think for yourself. And one of the things, that I really learned from writing about the activists and politicians, scientists, and particularly organizers, political organizers that I write about in the book, is that their mental model of the voter is very different from most people, certainly than what I went in with, which is they view people as fundamentally conflicted rather than fundamentally monolithic. People as being, as Beyonce says in her new album, contradicted, right? Beyonce says, I'm contradicted.
This may be the first time Beyonce was quoted on this program.
Wow,
in a political
I'm glad
discussion.
we rectified that.
Well done,
yeah.
well done.
People are contradicted, right? And so, and I will tell you, just speaking personally, the reason some of these characters in the book were a revelation for me, in the Trump era in the United States, my mental model of people on the far side of me politically is not that they have a lot going on. It's that, they're monoliths of what is, frankly, an increasingly authoritarian, even fascistic movement. And that's sort of the single story I have in my mind for them. Well, a lot of the people I'm writing about will remind you that people may love fascism and they may also have married a black woman they met in high school who they love. And they may also have undocumented coworker who's amazing and think that there should be no undocumented people let into the country.
So it's
and
complicated.
People are complicated. And the resource that you have when you're trying to persuade or build bigger coalitions for multiracial democracy is to try to play up some of those B-sides that people have against that big thing. You can't replace what is in someone's head with the microchip of your opinion, right? If you've been married, it does not work. However, you can try to play up sources of dissonance within them that maybe have not been fully activated. That is what these persuaders do, and it works. It works more often than I think we'd think.
Let's do an excerpt from the book. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up. The stakes of this writing off were high. Some of the most dangerous and anti-democratic movements of our time had managed, in spite of those features, to make their causes appear welcoming and make newcomers feel at home, whereas some of the most righteous, inclusive, and just movements gave many the feeling of being inaccessible, intractable, and alienating. It seems to me you think the right is very much better at persuading people of the rightness of their cause and bringing people into their fold than the progressive side of the spectrum is. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. By the way, that paragraph is the last paragraph I added to the book. I added it right after I'd finished it. So it's interesting. It was very important to me. I'm going to try an analogy on you, and you'll figure out the Canada analog of this. I sometimes think about this as the New York-Kansas problem, right? New York City versus the state of Kansas. New York City, on a formal level, what is the laws, what are the rules? It's the most inclusive place in the United States. The actual laws, the substance, the structures of New York City. But the vibe New York gives to a lot of people is a little hard to get into, a little complicated, just like you have to know things. It's hard to get into restaurants, hard to get into clubs. New York can give a vibe of feeling inaccessible, even though formally it is one of the most inclusive, And Kansas is the opposite. You go there, everybody's so nice, smiling. You look at the laws on the books, you're living in the 18th century in many ways, right? Mm-hmm. I think in many ways the progressive left sometimes has a problem of being formally committed to an agenda that is, the most inclusive agenda in human history if you look at it on paper, but gives off a vibe of being a hard-to-access movement. If you don't know the right terms, if you don't understand the pronouns thing, if you were kind of socialized as a man 40 years ago, you're not a predator, but you're just socialized in a different time.
We're going to shame you.
You can't quite get in. And The far right in the United States is the opposite. It is formally committed to one of the most exclusionary programs in modern American history. But if you look at something like the Trump rally, the vibe is come as you are, no judgment, get in here. And I think we have to reverse that. I think we need to align the formal commitment to inclusion in the progressive movement with a kind of vibe that is just open and easy and lots of on-ramps.
Which categories did you like the best?
So I really liked geography, generally speaking. I think I was pretty good at, unless it was too U.S. specific, and then it gets to be a little bit, I feel like the American players have a bit of an advantage there. But world geography was good. Anything to do with history, like there was a world leaders category at one point that I quite enjoyed in the regular season, and then actually again in my semifinal, but I kept getting beaten on the buzzer. Yeah, and then music stuff tends to be pretty good for me as well, just because it's not a strong suit for a huge amount of Jeopardy players. Like I find a lot of players that are really good have said that they don't do as well on music. For me, I think my music knowledge is like good enough that it sometimes gives me a little bit of an advantage. So, yeah.
Now, you live in a city which has a National Hockey League team, a Canadian Football League team, a National Basketball Association team, a Major League Baseball team, a Major League Soccer team. Not to mention all of the college and university sports teams that we have in this city. And you know nothing about sports. How is that possible?
I'll defend myself a little bit. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I know nothing about sports. But my sports knowledge is pretty weak. I think the reason why I say I have weak sports knowledge is because people who know sports really know sports. Like if you're gonna describe yourself as a sports fan or as someone who's deep in on sports trivia, you really have to know your stuff. And people do, they get so into it. There's so many statistics, there's a lot of history. For me, I don't have cable television. I don't have a way of watching all of these teams. And there's just so much of it that I find it's like overwhelming. I have some knowledge of a couple of things in sports. I used to be a really big cycling fan. So I know, if there was ever a pro cycling category on Jeopardy, I think I would do pretty okay. And the Olympics is something that I typically follow, so sort of like Olympic history, I know a little bit about that. But the conventional, the big four sports leagues, I think I got in on a clue about what was Alex Ovechkin's team at one point during my run, and I felt pretty happy to get one hockey clue.
And the answer is?
The Washington Capitals.
Very good.
I was like, the Nationals is the baseball team. I don't want to muck that up.
Well, since you're on a roll here, okay, I know I could beat you at Jeopardy, as long as every question was about sports.
And you would. You absolutely would.
So here we go. Shall we try?
Let's try.
Okay. He's the all-time NHL leader in wins for goaltender. And may I remind you, Mateo, please form your answer in the form of a question. He's the all-time NHL leader in wins for a goaltender.
In wins for a goaltender?
Yes.
Oh.
He's from Quebec. Played for the New Jersey Devils.
Who is Martin Brodeur?
Awesome. Well done.
I wouldn't have gotten it without the hints, but
Awesome.
that took me there.
Okay. He is the all-time strikeout king in Major League Baseball. Nicknamed the Texas Express. Could throw over 100 miles an hour back in the day.
Nolan Ryan?
Yes, fantastic. I'm deeply impressed.
I was reading his Wikipedia article the other day.
One more. They've won more Grey Cups than any other team in CFL history.
I'm going to say, who are the Argonauts?
You are brilliant.
All right.
Even the sports questions you're nailing here today. Well done.
You threw me a bit of a bone with some of those hints, but I'm glad to show I don't know nothing about sports.
Yes, that's great. Okay, I want to ask you one last question about politics, because, of course, that's your avocation now. You're the new host for the Backbench, the podcast on Canadaland. You were... What was this once upon a time? You did something on Parliament Hill once upon a time, right?
I did, yeah. So I was actually a tour guide for the Library of Parliament. So the summer after my first year of university, I moved to Ottawa. I'd never even been there before, actually. So I moved to Ottawa kind of sight unseen to take this job as a tour guide because I thought it was such a great opportunity. And I had a fantastic time. I think Summer 16 was a good time to be in Ottawa. It was sort of exciting. There was a lot going on the Hill, and I got to work with... Well, just a fantastic team of other guides, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to mention some politicians.
No, although I had some run-ins with some politicians on the Hill, which was cool. I saw Jeff Regan around a couple times, Harjit Sajjan, Elizabeth May, some other names that I'm probably forgetting. But no, the team of other guides that you get to work with, I think, was really the highlight, because everybody was a university student. I think I was the baby of the group because I was 17, and I think the oldest of us was maybe 23, Sweet. Which now feels, a normal age, but at the time seemed a bit old.
Well, let me ask you the question everybody is thinking right now, which is, can you ever imagine running for politics someday?
And I know that this is what everyone says, but I will say absolutely not.
How come?
I don't, being a public figure has been a bit of it's been an interesting transition for me, and it's not something that I necessarily would have chosen. Jeopardy sort of chose me, and I thought I was going to go play one game, and that was going to be it, and no one would really hear tell of me after that. So I think that as a politician, of course, you're under such scrutiny, not only for the decisions that you make in leadership, but also in some cases for things that you do outside of your work. And I'm not sure that that's something I want to really lean into. I think I want to, keep a close eye on politics. If I'm able to continue working maybe in journalism, media, whatever, I think that would be a great delight for me, but I don't see myself running for office. I see some of my college friends running for office.
Got it.
I'm almost 4 years out from chemotherapy and all of that, and I'm starting to feel more normal. I think there's a lot of side effects that do linger, and it's really cancer specific and treatment specific. I suffered a lot with brain fog and memory issues. A lot of people have range of motion issues or other physical disabilities or even invisible disabilities. But I would say, a lot of people think the treatment ends and that's the end of it. I would say 100% it's the emotional aspect of cancer, the psychosocial aspect of cancer that's the most difficult. And, I think about cancer less now. It's been 4 years since my initial diagnosis, but I don't think that I'll ever really be free from that. It was a really big thing in my life, a very traumatic event, and I'm healing from it, but I don't think I'll ever be able to completely walk away from it.
And I presume you're going in for regular scans now. How often does that happen?
Actually, no, they don't typically scan. I go every 6 months to see my oncologist, but other than that, unless I have a complaint or something, they don't do any sort of exploratory medicine in that way. They don't do any CT scans or MRIs. I don't get blood work even. I just talk to my oncologist every 6 months, and that's kind of it.
How do you feel right now?
I feel good. I feel really good. I am doing great. Like I said earlier, it's really difficult. October was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which always brings up complicated feelings. But I've really tried to make good things happen from my cancer diagnosis. I started a support group for young women in Southern Alberta. We're over 200 women strong, all living with or beyond breast cancer. I do a lot of advocacy work in the breast cancer space as well, too. And I just finished up a big series with Global News, an 8-part series discussing the issues that young people face when going through a young cancer diagnosis.
Good for you. That's wonderful. Abba, maybe we could pick up from where Michelle left off, in as much as there are unique challenges that people in their 30s who get cancer or younger face that perhaps people in their, I don't want to sound ageist here, but people in their 70s and 80s don't face. Can you talk to us about some of that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that Michelle touched on a very important aspect, actually, of being diagnosed with cancer as a young person, which is survivorship. And how does one lead their lives beyond the cancer journey? I think of my young patients as warriors who entered a war and kind of came out as heroes. And as you use the word trauma to describe your journey, and I would kind of echo that from all of the individuals that I've spoken to. I think that having your whole life ahead of you still beyond cancer is really what sets this apart, because you have to figure out, how do I overcome the trauma that I experienced in my past with the cancer, its treatment, its diagnosis, fear of cancer recurrence, but also continue to, follow my career dreams, my family, and all those other roles that are still ahead of you.
Timothy, you having done this report with Harvard, and we now have more information about this than we had before, what would you like to see emerge as a result of this additional information that we now have?
Well, I think we learned from the report that the clinical community, a lot of the people out there don't really appreciate early onset cancer. They're just, as we just heard, that there's a lot of people out there whose symptoms, whose situation is poo-pooed rather than followed up upon. And that's something that we need to educate both the clinical community as well as the patient, the general community, so that people who are at risk of cancer, people who may have cancers or symptoms, advocate. As we just heard, she advocated for herself and made something happen and probably saved her life as a result of that. And people won't advocate for themselves if they don't understand that they should be following up on their symptoms. They should be questioning their doctor's decisions. They should be understanding that there may be something more going on than what the doctor sort of expects to see. And as cancers in younger people are more and more common, we really need to make sure that people are educated and clinicians are educated to look for these symptoms.
I'm going to pull up a survey. According to a national survey of over 1,000 people across the country, 2/3 of Canadians think that it was necessary or somewhat necessary to invoke the Emergency Act to get the trucker convoy protest under control. 31% said it was unnecessary or somewhat unnecessary, and the remaining 5% said they were unsure. This survey was commissioned by CTV News, conducted by Nanos Research, and this was just earlier this week. Kara, I'm going to come to you first. I want to get all of your takes on this. Was the Trudeau government right to invoke the Emergency Act last February? I kind of get a sense of where we stand on this.
Yeah. So my answer is going to be no. I certainly understand the public view that this was that something had to happen, something had to be done. There's no doubt about that. The question is what and whether there were ways outside of the use of this extraordinary legislation that could have done it. And my view is that there were, and that the act itself should not have been used here.
Michael?
Yes, it was justified. And what I'm saying in terms of the exact same standards from Section 2 applying to both the government and CSIS is consistent with the Hansard debates. The levels, the thresholds are different. And this came up in Mr. Vigneault's testimony, the head of CSIS. This is why he was able to say, for the purposes of CSIS's covert activities, we do not meet our threshold on Section 2 in terms of a national emergency. However, Prime Minister, the same standards applied to your job in terms of political management of an emergency crisis do apply. And that is why I, the head of CSIS, am recommending to you that the act should be invoked at this time. That is the original intent. The bars cannot be the same for CSIS and the government, because that would give CSIS a veto over the government's decision to ever invoke the act, which, although I understand the logic of seeking to protect civil liberties by that very high bar for government, would in fact be a legal recipe for a police state by putting the CSIS agency in the driver's seat.
Alex, I'm going to come to you.
Well, picking up on the polling numbers, I can certainly confirm that the 100 or so people we've heard at the People's Commission, overwhelmingly, there was appreciation and relief around the fact that the Emergencies Act was invoked, often with a degree of reluctance that it took something like that. I myself am a little bit more ambivalent. I'm not firmly convinced. I won't yet go into the camp of clearly saying no, it was not justified. But I think we've got the wrong question. I mean, obviously this is the question that's required to be asked in this inquiry, because that's what the Emergency Act requires. But really the more important question is, why is it, how is it that things were so broken and dysfunctional that 3.5 weeks in, we reached a point where, justified or not, it was felt that the only way to bring this to an end was the Emergencies Act. That is what we really need to understand.
Laura, I'll come to you as well. And we should note that, the federal government did say that this was on their list of possible resorts, not on the top. It was on their B list, I believe it was the language there. But Laura, what's your take?
I think that, it did reach a point where there was so much dysfunction at so many levels of government, and we can see through the internal communications of ministers and staff that they felt that the federal government had to be seen to be doing something because this was happening on the federal government's doorstep. So whether it was legally justified or not, whether it was necessary or not, I think if you think about it from a political perspective, which is, of course, a major lens that the government would have been looking through at the time, people wanted this to end, and they were looking to the federal government, and there was very few tools that the federal government had that would have been as effective as the Emergencies Act. And so whether it was right or wrong, I think one of the calculations that would have been on the government's mind was whether the political fallout would be greater for using the Emergencies Act and ending this, even if it was maybe not done perfectly properly, or allowing it to go on indefinitely.
All right, Kara, I'm going to come to you. The federal government, of course, is making the argument that the CSIS definition of a national security threat is too narrow and is outdated, again, written in the 1980s. A different time when we look at organized demonstrations, we just look at sort of the crowdfunding and how the payments were going through, a very different time. Do you think we need a broader, or at least a more updated definition of what constitutes a threat to national security?
So I think that's a hard question to answer because it depends on the purpose for which we're using it, and I still have to disagree that we're talking about different standards. I think it's a false argument to say that by incorporating the same definition into the Emergencies Act, we're suggesting that CSIS has a veto. That's not the argument at all. It's clearly the government's decision whether they feel the threshold was met, not CSIS's. But I think that, and frankly, I think, the question of whether you get to wiretap someone or whether you get to impose exceptional, extraordinary, and likely, but for the invocation of the act, otherwise unconstitutional measures on the entire population of Canada, that should be a very high threshold. We need a high bar for that. So certainly national security, the calculus has changed, the environment has changed. We're a more global, place than we were in the past, and those things are important and they need to be considered. But we also have to be careful that I think if everything is national security, then nothing is.
That's just some of what we've covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.